Before we start, I'm going to give a talk about the China tide, what I call the China tide. And the reason why I'm giving this talk is because there's a lot of talk about different topics, but I was going through the content this year. There's literally not a single talk that has or delivers anything about Asia. And honestly, I think it's insane that we're not talking about Asia. So I decided I'm going to show people, the people that are intelligent and come to my talks, so you guys, great, that this is way more serious than we think it is. So let me explain. Most people have this idea of China, right? You know, the old school, the Chinese wall. But this is China. This is Beijing. This is Shanghai. This is Hong Kong. This is Guangzhou, that probably some people don't even know where it is. Okay? So, nevertheless, we keep getting obsessed with the promised land. You know, the Golden Gate, the Bay Area, the place, the land of the farting unicorns. Okay? And the truth is, yes, they do have a point, because if you take 2017 unicorns, a big chunk of those unicorns are headquartered in California. Now, that is changing, and it's changing fast. And there's one name why that's changing so fast. Mr. Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States of America. Now, the truth is, he's gone on a crusade against immigrants, and you've all heard about this in the news. And one of the places which has the largest density of immigrants is Fortune 500 companies, California. Now, some of the last studies from 2016 say that out of the accounted unicorns, 51% of them, unicorns, for those of you that don't know, are companies that are valued at over $1 billion. 51% are co-founded by immigrants. And if you actually go down to key positions, 71% have immigrants in key positions in the company. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, this is from April 2018, the Trump administration is killing it with bureaucracy. This is just one news, but this is 18 hours ago. This was yesterday. Thousands of recent graduates awaiting H-1B visas are losing their jobs because they cannot get a visa. Now, what do you think is going to happen with innovation when you keep pushing this stuff? Well, something very, very simple. Is if you already had a problem with talent and talent retention, you're just increasing exponentially this issue. The thing is, and I don't know if you guys are going to see it from the back, but just focus on the red and blue. The red dots show decreasing funding in different startup hubs. And if you look at the US, all the West Coast is just like disappearing. And if you look at Europe, it's growing. And if you look at China, it's growing. So there are real consequences to the shortage of talent. People are not willing to travel to the US anymore to actually go and work there. But this is not just about talent. It's also about research and development, about basic science. The investment of the US government in R&D has decreased continuously for the past 40 years and keeps decreasing. And one of the immediate consequences is that people that are key researchers on the next wave of technology and innovation are leaving the country. This guy here, Geoffrey Hinton, he's the founder of the Vector Institute, but he was the father of most of the mathematics that run deep neural networks right now. So most of the AI technology that's being used nowadays, he's the one that invented the math. And you know where he lives, where the Vector Institute is? Anyone? Toronto, Canada. Let me show you Mr. Jürgen. He's the father of what's called the LSTM, so the long short-term memory, which is one of the algorithms key for deep reinforcement and deep learning. And you know where he lives? Lugano, Switzerland. And let me introduce you this guy, Dr. Demis Hassabis, which clearly is not from the US. And he lives in London, and he was the CEO and co-founder of DeepMind, which is one, if not the most advanced AI lab in the world, property of Google, bought in 2014. But surprisingly, they have labs in London, in Canada, and an advanced post in the US, because, yeah, it would be bad if you were bought by Google and you don't have people there, okay? Now, it's not only about research. That funding problem also extends to investors and to startups. This is the number of money raised by VCs in the last quarters, and 2018 was actually very good. But there's a big problem with this. Even though it's growing, the red line shows you the decrease on seed funding globally. But it's even more important, or the drop is even bigger in the US. Meanwhile, China in 2016 raised more money in funds than the US. So the problem is not that the US is raising a lot of funds, which they are. The problem is that the money is accessible also elsewhere. So it's not accessible only in the US anymore. Now, if on top of all of this, you add the fact that you have government intervention, so let me show you the CFIUS department, which is the agency that's in charge of regulating M&A, so mergers and acquisitions from foreign companies in the US. It's becoming a political weapon for the Trump administration. This was just, this is from June of this year, but this is The Economist in March. CFIUS intervenes in Broadcom attempt to buy Qualcomm. So they're intervening in all these M&As happening, which someone could argue good or bad reason. The fact is it's turning into a political weapon to the point that the president goes on Twitter giving Amazon shit. And immediately after, he launches an investigation into review of the Postal Service in the US. But if that's not enough, don't worry. September of this year, White House proposed executive order to Trump that would examine tech companies' practices. Did you hear that Amazon just raised their base salary in the US? This is why. This is why, because they're going to be investigated. The thing is, I'm not saying it's good or bad. The fact is that the government is intervening in technology, and a lot of companies are not happy with this. Now, let's be honest, it's not just Trump. This is not Trump. Trump is just an acceleration of a trend that has been happening roughly since 2004, so more or less the end of the Bush era and the two terms of Obama presidency. Now, the perception of the US as a superpower has actually decreased drastically. And this is not just perception, it's all the indicators are showing this. And the problem with that is that despite what goes in the US, the world doesn't stop with the US. Other areas, other countries are raising their GDPs. Other countries are moving really fast to take the place of the US, chiefly among them China. And China, the word is exploding, like literally exploding year by year. I did this research. Part of this research was done in November of last year. I updated the numbers this year, and it's insane what happened in less than 11 months. Insane how fast it's growing. So let me show you. This was from the Kleiner-Perkins slide of the trends of the internet. These were the top 20 technology companies by market value. In 2017, there were 7 Chinese companies. 7 Chinese companies. This is the same slide, 2018. There's 9 Chinese companies on the top 20 versus 11 from the US. It's not only that. Is that Apple just lost their position as a leader in market share in smartphones, the second position, to Huawei, Chinese company, and Xiaomi is about to eat Apple's lunch in probably a year, something like that. Xiaomi, Chinese company, again, just coming into Spain. Truth being said, if you accumulate the investment that has happened since 2012, Silicon Valley still is the leader, or was the leader. But just in the last 2 years, if you add Beijing and Shanghai, are nearly reaching the levels of investment that you had in Silicon Valley in the past years. But this has only happened in this past year, year and a half. And even more importantly, I think the interesting thing is a trend that's happening in early stage and first-time funding, which is while first-time funding and seed rounds are decreasing in Silicon Valley, they are increasing in China, in Beijing, in Shanghai, and other areas of Asia. And this is the reality. This is Q2 2018. The red box is volume of investment by China. The blue box is volume of investment of Canada and US combined. Last quarter. Truth being said, the number of deals is still way bigger in the US than it is in China. But the size of the rounds is incredibly bigger in China than it is in other places. And not only that, this is August 2018, number of unicorns globally in the world per country. United States, 130, China, 79, and growing, and growing. Rest of the world, 0. Okay? Now, it's not just the funding that's incredible in China. It's also the education, and the speed of their education is absolutely incredible. This is the top list of universities worldwide, and China has their first university in place number 27th, and growing. These are the scores. On the top, you see the score and the evolution of the score of Stanford University. At the bottom, you see the score evolution of Beijing University. One is decreasing, the other one is skyrocketing. This is from last year. Okay, this is not from 3-4 years ago. This is last year. Probably this year, when they update the score, is going to be even higher. But if you're not convinced with that, to the left, red line, number of people with a graduate degree in China, blue line, degrees in the US. On the other side, doctoral fellows, red line, China, blue line, US. Big difference. Absolutely big difference. Not enough. Research in AI. Number of papers mentioning deep learning, red China, blue US. Number of papers mentioning AI, mentioning machine learning. Literally, the research is swamping everything. I'm not saying that's the best research in the world, that to be fair, but the amount of money being poured in research, poured in education, is just like outranks anything we've seen worldwide. It's not only that. Investment in AI companies has already surpassed the number of Chinese investments by a large percentage right now compared to the US. The number of deals that China does in US companies is growing faster than the number of deals that the US actually does in Chinese companies. But China is not only about education, it's not only about AI, it's not only about the funding, it's also about energy. On the left, you have the amount of energy produced by China so far. The other column is the expected growth, potential growth of energy production for China. That's China, that's the US, that's Europe, okay? And why this matters? Well, it matters because one of the largest industries that's launching is the electrical vehicle and mobility as a service. And do you know who's the leader? China. You know, here the answer is China in most cases, okay? So there's very large strengths around China. China has some very powerful core characteristics. First one is they have a massive holistic approach to value chain dominance. Okay, just looking at the big wall of China, you know, when they do things, they do it well, big. Okay, and that's translating into an incredible impact in all their businesses. One of them, for example, is right now they own 50% of lithium production in the world is in China's hands. And if you don't know this, lithium is the major ingredient for electric vehicle batteries and any kind of smartphone or device that we have right now. They own and control 50% of global production of lithium. Not just that, this is the map of their operations in Europe. They own from airports to seaports to oil to nuclear to solar to wind to buildings to football teams. Complete chemical industries, complete verticals in the value chain. So it's not just a Badulaque, it's not just a 7-Eleven that China's own. They actually own the whole infrastructure. The second thing they have in their advantage is that they work in a very competitive market in China. which means that they're struggling to advance in China. So one of the things they're doing is they're going abroad to set up their companies. And you know, the #1 area right now that's receiving Chinese investment around startups and technology is South America. Lax regulation, a lot of room to grow, a lot of countries. So they've grown in information and communication and tech and consumer products. They've increased the number of deals in the past years has exploded. Actually, this was data from last year. They've gone from 30 million in 2015 to $1 billion in investment in 2017. And growing. And growing. Now, the number 3 advantage they have is they have government co-investment. For all the things that we say about the Chinese government, Mr. Winnie the Pooh actually helps a lot in the technology space, okay? And number 4 is that there's a lax regulations or literally inexistent regulations around many things, okay? And this is one of the bicycle graveyards that they have around Beijing. And this is kind of more or less looking like my neighborhood right now, okay? Because they're literally flooding. Mobike here in Madrid is flooding everything with bikes. There's also weaknesses to China, though. Number 1 is government intervention. So they give money, but they also intervene, okay? So Apple recently had to hand the keys of the encryption of the data on the on the Apple cloud in China. And like them, all the big Chinese companies, everyone has to play with the government if you want to do business there. Privacy fears. The amount of tracking and privacy invasion in China is unheard of. Okay, 1984 is nothing compared to what China is deploying now. Not in 3 years, not in 5 years, now. Then they struggle with internationalization of their business models. So while WeChat, for example, makes way more money than WhatsApp, they still struggle to get traction beyond their Chinese users. And like WeChat, you also have like Alibaba, GD, Tencent, and a bunch of other Chinese companies when they export their product outside the Chinese border, they struggle to get people and the traction outside of the country. And number 4 is they still have massive core technology dependency, especially from the US. But that is changing, and it's changing fast. Just to give you an example, this is CTE, which is the largest, one of the largest telecommunication companies in China. And that drop that literally volatilized like, I don't know, 35–40% of the market value of the company was thanks to Trump saying, I ban any US government and company from buying anything from CTE and Huawei. And that was a drop. That's the impact that it has. That's the dependency it has because CTE doesn't produce any component. They buy all the components from the US, most of them. But that is changing fast. So China 3.0, what is the future of China? What are the next steps around China? What's happening? Number 1, facial recognition and tracking systems are the best in the world. In the world. There's no one that tracks people and invades privacy better than China. Yes, you laugh, but they're going to push it here, okay? So you're not going to be laughing in a year or 2 years. Number 2 is autonomous vehicles. Never mind Waymo, never mind Ford, never mind what these guys are doing. The top 5 companies in China, all 5 of them are developing autonomous vehicles. And they have nothing to do with other technology. Baidu, which is a search engine. Tencent, which is social networks. GD, which is a retailer. Didi, which is car sharing. Alibaba, retailer again. It doesn't matter. The big companies, all of them are doing autonomous vehicle. Number 3, semiconductors and AI chips. They are pushing hard, thanks to Trump. They're pushing hard to break the dependency they have against the US. And they're starting to make it. Huawei just released their new AI chip, the Kirin 980, and it's already outperforming anything Qualcomm has in the market right now. The same thing happens with Huami. Huami is a company that's invested by Xiaomi, Chinese phone maker, and they created a wearable chipset that is 38% better than anything ARM has in the market right now. Not only that, Alibaba has just opened a new department just to build AI chips to surpass anything in the market, to have their own infrastructure, their own semiconductor industry. This is happening now. In a year, they will be the leaders of semiconductor industry. And lastly, it's also about quantum dominance. I don't know if you guys have heard about the next evolution in computing is quantum computing. Alibaba has the most powerful quantum computer out there. And if that wasn't enough, China owns the only quantum satellite communication system in the world. The only one. No one else has a quantum communication satellite. Not that we know of. Okay? Now, the question we need to ask ourselves is, as China gets expanding beyond their borders, as China keeps pushing and gets dominance of the world, as it's already showing, how are we going to deal with the invasion of privacy in our own countries? How are we going to deal with Chinese government intervention in other countries? How are we going to deal with having Chinese VCs in our boards? How are we going to deal with needing Chinese research to develop our companies? I hope this gives you food for thought, and thank you for attending. Thank you very much.